Thank you all so much for coming out. I'm honored that all of you came to this talk instead of the other fantastic talks. My name is Tim Medin. I founded Red Siege. I've been doing that now for, what's the math? 6, 7? No, it's not 5, 6 years. I'm the lead author of the SANS pen testing course, the 560 Enterprise Pen Testing course, Ein's faculty, pen tester, speaker, world traveler. As I mentioned, if you want a copy of the slides, you can download it, redsiege.com/whatthe. Yes, I gave you our QR code. Some of you are probably nervous. Cool. But if I was going to own you with a QR code, I would not stand on the stage at a recorded session with my name on the slides and give you the ownage link. Just saying, right? Not a very smart move. All right, so there we go. Before we start talking about some of the modern attacks, let's talk through what it looks like from the attacker's perspective, okay? The best resource that we really have for this is the Verizon Data Breach Report. And the reason is we can share that, right? An organization gets popped, we share that with each other. What we're not doing, I do pen testing, we got a number of other pen testing firms here at Black Hills, by the way, thank you for hosting this. But we can't share our pen test reports, right? And if we did, would there be a lot of lawyers involved? So the best way we have to see what's effective and realistically what the real bad guys are doing is by looking at the shared information for some of those breaches. Let's take a quick peek here. So according to the results, 83% of all breaches use an external attacker. Anybody shocked by this number? No, right? We all expect a large number of external threat actors to be breaching organizations today, right? The next number surprises the heck out of me. That's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 breaches is from an internal attacker. This might be the salesperson, the engineer, that when they leave, they take the information with them. I'm sure, have any of you seen one of those stories where an admin gets fired and then uses their access afterwards to, in short, screw up the company? How many of you have seen articles like that relatively recently, right? So that's a significant issue here. Now, if you're any good at math and you do the math here, you're like, wait a second, that's more than 100. There are some where we have a little bit of both. Insider plus the outsider. And it could be that the internal person is selling access to some sort of ransomware actor. This 1 in 5 number surprises the heck out of me, right? 1 in 5, that is absolutely massive number when it comes to that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit later. The initial access piece, use of stolen credentials through the roof. Through the roof, right? We've got things like phishing, we've got reused passwords, we've got social engineering, just a ton of reused credentials. Even with the MFA. We'll come back and talk about some of the MFA a little bit later. Much further down this list is exploits. Out of curiosity, how many of you are pen testers? Any pen testers in the room? Like a giant, what do you call a group of pen testers? A sadness of pen, I don't know what the group term is. But that exploit number, does that seem high to you as a pen tester? You're supposed to say yes. Sorry, you ruined my analogy, I'm not asking you. In my mind, this is a big number. Uh-oh. This is a big number. We don't see that. I would expect in this case for initial access, 1 in 10 of the pen tests that we do, we get the initial access from the outside with an exploit. I don't really see that. Now, granted, in my experience, my sample size is biased, right? We're a pen test company. If they've got a mature enough security program to hire pen testers, they're probably going to have a little bit better patch management related to that. Now, with these exploits, when we take a look into that, they're not usually the most recent kind of thing here, right? So the ways in, we got credentials, we've got exploits. I talked to my friends who do incident response, and I asked them, I say, hey guys, what's the most common way that you're seeing the attackers get in? They're like phishing. I'm like, okay, cool. What's the second most common? Phishing. I'm like, okay, give me the third one. He's like, Tim, guess what I'm gonna say? I'm like, don't say phishing again, I'm gonna punch you in the neck. He's like, phishing, right? And that lines up with, one, some of the credential thefts that we get with phishing, some of the payloads and the exploits associated with that. Let's dig into each one of these pieces just a little bit here, right? How many of you, have any of you done or written exploits? Is it hard today? He's nodding, he's like, yep, it's time to get some bourbon. It's hard. Back in the olden days, it was dead freaking simple. Now it's hard. We got DEP and ASLR and all sorts of memory protections to make it significantly more difficult, both in the OS, but also in the apps themselves. And it makes it harder to write one that works and harder to have one that's actually reliable. It's a very difficult thing these days. And I find I don't end up using a ton of these days. I've talked to other pen test orgs and they're like, yeah, we don't really use too much either. Let's take a look at some of the numbers though. Here's some of the stats. This is from CISA 2021. The stats are a little bit old, but the story's the same. I couldn't find a similar chart for 2023, but from everything that the people I've talked to, very similar here. So we got here at the top, I know it's a little bit of an eye chart to see this, but we've got at the top here log4j, right? Been around for a while. Now remember that first part of the CVE, what is that? I mean, there's CVE and then what's after that? The year, right? So it tells us when this thing came out, right? 2021, 21, 21, et cetera. We get down a little bit further. Let me grab my pen. Right here, right? Yeah, so this stat's from 2021. We've got some of the most commonly exploited vulnerabilities here. And we got 2020, we got a 2019, right? These patches have been around for like 9 months or more. Do you know what you can make in 9 months? A human, right? We can actually breed new people to patch these vulnerabilities for us, right? It's like the world's crappiest sci-fi, right? It's like Hunger Games, let's fight amongst ourselves. No, we're gonna breed people and you're in district 1337, you're the patchers. That just sounds horrible, right? Another stat, I love this graphic. Again, the reference here a little dated. The story is exactly the same. 2020. Look at these numbers. 2019, 2019, 2019, 2019, 2018. This patcher that we have created can now walk, right? We got a 2015. The human we have created can now read. It can realistically apply the patch, right? How many of you had your kids like, yeah, just figure out the computer for me, Dad, right? Or you did for your parents, let's say. And you can have that kid come over and click next, 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 install the update, right? So when it comes to these exploits, we're not seeing a ton of like the 0 days. And if they are, they're typically very shortly lived. What we see the real adversaries doing is using these older vulnerabilities that have been around for a while. Meaning the simple problem here is a lot of the hygiene. We're just not simply cleaning up, right? So we've got to stay ahead of that. Now, any of you manage your Nessus or whatever product to do vulnerability management? Any of you do that and want to admit it? We got a couple people like, yeah, but I hate it. Yeah, okay, cool. Right, if you look inside that list, it's huge. It is an absolutely massive freaking list. How the hell do you decide which ones to do first? Well, you could look at the severity. Honestly though, a lot of the severity in these tools sucks. Like real bad. Like you'll see vulnerabilities on a website where it's like, oh, this PHP vulnerability is the worst thing known to mankind. If you exploit it, we're all gonna die. But realistically, it's not exploitable because the code doesn't use it, it doesn't take unsanitized input from the user, but of course we spend a lot of cycles cleaning that up because it looks so bad. And we oftentimes have metrics, mean time to patch, right? So we end up spending a ton of time on these issues that realistically don't freaking matter because that's what's being measured and that's what we're incentivized to fix, right? Anybody have a working exploit against anything TLS 1.1? The answer is no. But if it's a PCI type of thing, worst vulnerability known to mankind. Ignore the 7-character passwords that are totally okay with PCI, but we end up spending a ton of the time on this vulnerability that you can't do a damn thing with. You just simply can't. So getting proper prioritization here, so important. Look at what's actually being exploited. Look back at the previous list here. Is there public code available? That makes it worse. Now, if you're like nation state and you're like, yeah, I work for the NSA and it could be exploitable, well, in that case, it's different because, Russia might have actually developed a weaponized payload. The game changes a little bit, but we've got to focus on what actually matters with patching, not just patching for the sake of patching. If we want to do patching for the sake of patching, yeah, it looks cool, but we may as well breed the patching people. Lock them in a closet, have them click next, 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 next on everything. If we just want to check the box on making our dashboard look better and our metrics look better without necessarily the increase in security. Yes, sir. Say real loud. Yeah, so the question is here, while we're patching stuff, why don't we patch the other stuff at the same time? What I see happening is people get stuck patching everything and they don't end up patching what's important. And they're just spinning, we call it like just turning over rocks. Like it's oftentimes really important to the boss, to the business, that you just look busy. Whether you actually, at the end of the day, have accomplished a single task, it looked like you were busy through the day and we have a dashboard to show it, and we end up focusing on some of the wrong things. And I'm not saying don't patch the other stuff, but it could free up resources where we could work on the things that matter. Changing the password policy, incident response, threat intelligence, or some of the stuff like that. Let's talk a little bit about social engineering. By the way, if you've not met Joe Gray, fantastic individual. You know why? He's a social engineer. It's literally his job to make you like him. Okay? But he's doing a workshop later today. I highly recommend checking that out. He's also got a talk tomorrow. Check that out. How many of you pen testers have been pen testing for at least 5 years? Yeah, 5, keep them up, keep them up. How about 10 years? 15. Right, okay, so we got me and him. back in the olden days, wasn't it a great time? Remember MS 08 067? Oh, yeah, somebody did a yeehaw in the back. Hell yeah, right? It was the easiest thing ever. In fact, I felt bad because it was like so easy sometimes. A coworker and I, Ollie, we would go on site for a test, and we're like, we're gonna race. We're gonna race to get to domain admin. And we queue up our commands beforehand. One of them, MS 08 067, gave you system level access on Windows, extraordinarily reliable. It existed for far, far, far too long in a day when patching was craptastic. And at one job, the guy's like, here's your desk. Let me get you some coffee. I'll be back in a few minutes. He comes back with the coffee. He's like, how's it going? And we're like, yeah, we got domain admin. 2 different ways. And he laughed. And we're like, no, we're not joking. Also, can you pass the coffee? We haven't even got started yet. It was just like hammering the keystrokes as fast as we could. But over time, those vulnerabilities went away. The OS got better. Our patching program got better. And we had to move from those remote code execution from a publicly available service or something to open through the firewall, inside, outside, whatever, and we had to move to client side. Because no one patched the client side software. Adobe PDF Reader and Flash were a gift for the longest time. And we kind of ignored it. It was definitely vulnerable before that, but the easy way in was the network services. So after that, we had to switch. We had to go like, oh, now I have to own somebody. I'm gonna have to get them to open up a PDF. This much extra effort, right? And now Flash is dead. The PDF readers and others have gotten better over time. So as attackers, the real ones, as well as, I guess I'm a real attacker, but not a bad guy, we had to switch. There's like construction going on or something. So we had to switch, right? What was the next easiest thing? Freaking passwords, right? Passwords now are the gift that keeps on giving. And we see some of that gets easier. How many of you have heard of like the MGM breach? How many of you did the MGM breach? Crap, he's like, oh, son of a, dang it, I revealed myself, right? No, that was a phone call that somebody called up, allegedly, I don't know, right? Called up to the help desk, got a password reset, and then took down the company. I think last I saw it cost them $100 million. That's a lot of money. Like I'd be happy with like a tenth, I'd be happy with $40, right? To use at the craps table, $100 million breach came from that. So we see the attackers moving to the easiest method, the easiest way in, right? So let's talk a little bit about that phishing. So phishing, right, we've seen plenty of this. A really good pretext makes it so much better. Some kind of sense of urgency, something relatable, some kind of deadline, some importance to this, and something that looks legitimate, right? Not just the generic, I'm trying to give away $100 million, I live in fill in the blank country. We all know that doesn't work, right? But if we can target that, it now gets much more effective. You want some additional reading here? Corey Overstreet has a great blog post on this. Now the big thing, what's the big thing in security, or frankly in the world right now? The big tech, what is it? AI, right? Everyone loves to talk about AI. And everyone's like, oh, it's gonna change pen testing. In my mind, not really, but there is some benefit to it from the attacker's perspective. I have seen phishing emails that are actually pretty convincing looking, but the one thing where I'm like, this is odd, the grammar. Something's off with the word choice as someone from the US, like it'll say, dear Mr. Tim. No one addresses each other as Mr. unless you work in the government, right? It's just Tim, right? Or maybe your title or something. So what we see is, like the AI stuff here, it doesn't make the good fishers better. It makes the really freaking terrible ones less sucky, right? It makes it so, hey, now my grammar is right, the right word selection to make this maybe more likely for someone to click. So I think that's a significant impact. Again, not because it's gonna make the best better, no way. If you've got that custom pretext where you've researched, that's always gonna be your top tier. It's made your crappy ones a little bit better. One of the things we also see is a lot more morphing of emails, where the image changes just a little bit, just enough where the filtering software doesn't catch it. I don't know about you, I am seeing a lot more phishing emails make it into my inbox than I have before. Anybody else? Yeah. And we all have the latest and greatest filtering technology. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have that, but it lulls us into a false sense of security. Maybe not us, but the average user, right? We got our average user sitting at their desk, just trying to do their job, and hey, this thing landed in my inbox. Well, I know the security team is blocking the bad email, so if it came to my inbox, I know it's a real email. It lulls us into this false sense of security, collectively as humans, and people might click on it, right? We've seen more and more of the QR code type of thing. Anybody click on it, by the way? Oh, man, you guys have no fun. All right. It's just a lovely rickroll. But we see some of that kind of thing, right? So we need some training. What are some of the defenses? Everybody's doing training. Everyone's doing the phishing tests. Everybody's doing filtering, right? And we talk to organizations, and they're like, yeah, you know, we're not going to get breached. I'm like, why? Why is your organization specifically not going to be breached? And they'll list all of their technical and non-technical defenses. And then we ask them, we're like, hey, are there other businesses in your similar line of work who have been recently breached? And invariably, well, yeah, of course. And then you ask them, do you think they had antivirus? Well, yeah. Did they have email filtering? Yeah. Did they have this? Yes. Well, yeah, they had all those things too. Why are you different than them? And fundamentally, we're not, right? Those breaches can happen to anybody. So it's not a question of if the bad guys are going to get in, it's when. And then what the hell are you going to do about it afterwards? One of the biggest things, the most important things is quick detection and response. We were doing a test for an organization. They got the alert immediately. Didn't respond to it for 2 days. And we had moved all over the network. Cool, good job on the alerts, but you gotta do something with it, or it hasn't done you any good. That detection and response is so critically important, especially with the modern attackers. Not too many years ago, the average dwell time for the bad guys, 5 to 6 months. And I think the only reason we're seeing that time get shorter is because Victor in Moscow wants to party this weekend. Right? He wants his ransomware money now because he wants to get whatever the hell he's gonna get to go party. And it reduces the dwell time, not because we've done any sort of magical thing, because they're like, no, you know what? I want money and I want it now. I like money, right? We should hang out. Behavior detection. If you've got a person who's always working in Seattle and all of a sudden you get a login from, I don't know, pick another Singapore, you're like, wait a second. They were just in Seattle and 15 minutes later in Singapore. Those flights aren't that fast. That's odd, right? Detect, respond, lock it out, whatever. Let's spend a quick moment here on one of my favorite topics, bloody friggin' passwords, right? The stupid policies we have are so antiquated, and honestly, they work against us so heavily that it can actually lead to people picking worse and worse passwords, right? According to auditors, and I'm wording this very carefully, not to pick on the auditors, how often are we changing passwords? How many days? 90 days, right? Anybody know why? So when Moses came down from the mountain, there was a third tablet. No, sorry, wrong story. Einstein, right after he did E equals MC squared, derived the optimal, no. Realistically, it was two dudes, and I'm blaming it on the two dudes, sitting in a room, coming up with a policy, like, hey, Todd, should we change passwords? He's like, yeah, Scott, sure, let's change passwords. How often? I don't know, like 4 times a year. How many days are in a year? I don't know. How about like we do it every 90 days? Good call, Todd, let's do that. Right, with no sort of practical realization as to why we picked that 90 days. We talked about that dwell time, 6 months. That's 2 rotations. Have any pen testers in the room ever lost their access on a pen test because someone had to change their password because of rotation? No. In fact, I see them like, nope, not once. In fact, our pen tests last 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks on average. That's shorter than a rotation policy. At no point is Vladimir sitting in Moscow going, son of a bitch, comrade. That's my terrible Russian accent. We're hosed because Stacy had to change her password. But we see users move to simpler and simpler passwords, right? And that, of course, leads to bad things. Yes, we have MFA. We'll talk about some of that in a little bit. My other favorite, least favorite thing is, gotta love that complexity, right? Everybody in their password takes an O and converts it to a, louder, come on. An O converts it to a 0, right? True story, I was doing a talk in Dallas. Anybody know Chip and Joanna Gaines? Anybody have shiplap on their house? Yeah, right? So they opened for me at a conference, and by opened, I mean they were the keynote, and I spoke after them, and most of the people left. But I like to tell the story as they opened for me and warmed up the crowd. But I was talking through this with it was security for small businesses, and I was telling people, like, don't do this. This guy, true story, comes up to me afterwards. He goes, yeah, but Tim, I do so much more than that. He's like, I take an L. The dude looks around the room like a North Korean spy has stuck in for this exact moment. And he's like, I take an L and convert it to a 1, right? So I'm like, hey, do you also, and I'm like, well, maybe there is a spy. And I'm like looking around a little bit. Like, do you also take an A and convert it to the at symbol, not an ampersand, you're an animal. The at symbol, right? Every bad guy on the face of the planet knows these tricks. And we, or humans, think, oh, this is gonna be super secure. It just makes it harder to remember and just a little bit harder to guess or to crack. Or, my favorite, so we got the uppercase, right? We got the lowercase, we got the number, but then the website says this password isn't secure. You need a special character. What character does everybody pick? Exclamation point, right? Why? Top left key on the keyboard, right? Everybody knows these tricks, realistically not effective. Now, going back, has anybody ever worked at the help desk on January 2nd? Nobody? Right, okay, what's the phone call you got all day January 2nd? What's my password, right? People get off for the Christmas break. They're like, yeah, I got a giant break. They have some drinks. They hang out with their family. They need a lot more drinks because of the family. Then New Year's comes, and then they go back to work, and what's my password, right? And they hate calling IT, so they literally look outside. They're like, you know what? If only I could look outside and figure out what my password is. And they're like, what in life changes every 90 days? The season, right? So winter, capital W, lowercase inter. Now the problem is there's a winter this year, and ideally there's a winter next year, right? And they need a number. If only there were a number to differentiate this winter from next winter. And of course, what do they pick? The year, right? Winter 2023. Oh, wait, what if it's the secure version? Winter 2023, bang, right? Exclamation point, right? And we see this kind of thing time and time again. Derivations of welcome, derivations of the company name. So I recently took some business classes at they say it's a really good school, and I was doing a presentation for my colleagues here, and I grabbed everyone's passwords, emails. And I looked up on the dark web the passwords for everybody in my cohort. And I was doing this presentation, I was keeping it lively and fun, and I was telling people, like, hey, remember, use those unique passwords, right? Don't repeat. And they're looking at me like, yeah, sure. Next slide, I had passwords for 100 and something people on the screen. It was one of the most beautiful presentation moments of my entire life. This one lady looks at the screen, she goes, oh my God, it's mine, and then realizes what she's just saying, that her password is on the screen, right? These are your C-level executives at your organization, right? So we've got to get past some of that stuff. The breach credentials are the gift that always keeps on giving, right? Of course, the modern guidance. Don't force the rotation unless you suspect a breach. Get rid of the crappy complexity requirements. Get longer passwords. Realistically, use a password manager. Now, every once in a while, someone will push back and be like, well, but now all my passwords are in one place. I get it. But it's also one spot that you have to defend with a really good long password. Like, I've got a big old phrase on mine, good freaking luck, right? And now all my different sites, unique password, they're all completely different. It's better. It's not perfect. Perfect is we all remember a 64-character random password and use that for every single site uniquely, right? Not realistic. No way that's realistic. The next best method, highly recommend it. Things like MFA, right? This does make things better. There are some services, you can't use it. There are some users, and I can almost guarantee it, at your organization where MFA is disabled. And the reason is, we're looking at that. You can see it. It might have been, hey, we had to disable this for a quick second, temporarily, but do you know what temporarily means in Latin? Not freaking ever, right? You changed it temporarily, never changed it back. So audit that kind of thing. Make sure that things are enforced. Upgrade your systems to do this kind of thing. We see these, look for the banned passwords. Get rid of the season and the year, the month, and things like that from your passwords. Some of the services don't support this. There are still ways to phish this. My favorite story was the Uber breach. Dead, simple attack. All they did was spam the admins over and over at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe when they've been drinking, saying, can I have MFA? No. Can I have MFA? No. Can I have MFA? No. Can I have... Fine, make this go away, I want to sleep. And it works. I've done this before. It can and will work. We also have things like Evil Engine X, where we can grab these tokens, where the user enters it, we use the tokens, access whatever resources we need. We've got things like the consent attacks. Bo Bullock if you haven't taken his cloud course, highly recommend it. One of my guys at Red Siege took it this week, phenomenal class, but he talks through this and other more complicated versions of this. The really cool thing with these consent attacks is it's a pain in the ass to get rid of. You can change the user's password all day long. You can update their MFA all day long. It is permanent. And there's no great way to audit when somebody... Thank you, sir. All right. There's no great way to audit this. You can use a PowerShell to get this information, but then you manually have to review it. You can go into the web interface and click for 45 days to get through the interface and get all this information. It's tough, and it's enabled by default. Turn this off, require admin approval, or else you have persistent access to the information here. The key here, and this kind of, I sort of set myself up when we talked about some of the patching, we've always got to understand what's the big risk, right? And set up our defenses. I talk to organizations all the time, we do pen tests, and say, hey, what's important to you? And they're like, oh, domain admin. Yeah, it is, but domain admin is not the reason your business exists, right? We're not gonna make more money because we have more domain admins, right? We exist because we make widgets, we deliver a service, we have a product, whatever it might be, but what is the system or data, if lost, stolen, compromised, or destroyed, it's gonna have the biggest impact to your organization. Domain admin is still at least one step away from these important things. Set up your defenses against these guys instead of domain admin. Yes, it's important to detect that, but there's still many ways to get access to this data without domain admin. Now, I, as a pen tester, we call the win condition getting domain admin, right? Now honestly, it's a little misguided, because just as we talked about a second ago, what's actually important? Well, domain admin, but it's still at least one step away from what's actually important. There's still ways to get access to super important information without elevating permissions, without lateral movement, literally from the first system that you have access to. Always remember that. And all of these vulnerabilities, we need context. All right, so we got this vulnerability on this system. What kind of data does it hold? Is it super critical? All right, let's upgrade that sucker. Is it a temporary development system that's rebuilt every single day that has no production information and no access to the rest of the network? One, let's validate that. But two, maybe we let it ride, right? Helps us do some of that prioritization with some of those things, right? So what happens after that initial breach? And going back to our beginning, we have the outsider, right? Who fishes their way in, exploits their way in, password guess, social engineer. That rogue insider, what are you doing to test and say, hey, what happens after? What happens if filtering fails? What happens if my AV fails? What happens when fill in the blank tool fails? What next? What are the deeper problems here once these things start happening? Great story here from Mike on my team. I'll tell you a scenario I did. So I was doing a pen test for an organization. Now, this organization, you had to have like $10 million to knock on their door. And those are the people who are like broke, right? The people that the real rich are like, oh, you only have one jet? What's it like living in a third world country, right? Now, I, as an attacker, would be thrilled to get all the information from that one, right? $10 million, and I'm set. Now, the big dude's even more, right? In this particular organization, we looked around the network. I couldn't do lateral movement. I couldn't escalate. Looked around the network, And what we found out is there were users setting up shares to share data with each other because the real way to share the information was too painful for them. It was too hard. Now, do you think they cleaned up the share afterwards? Absolutely not. Do you think they properly locked down the permissions? No. They just wanted it to work. They're just trying to do their job. And I found bank accounts and routing numbers for very, very rich people, right? The gift that keeps on giving, there's also a Snaffler PowerShell script here, from PowerView, I forget the name, it's really long. Find interesting domain, file, share, file, something or another. Great resource for looking around your network, finding that interesting information. Requires some of the, here we go, that's what I'm looking for. Look around your network, Snaffler, there's plenty of other tools. As a defender, you can still use some of the offensive tools. In fact, I recommend it as defenders who want to get into offense, use the offensive tools yourselves. Find the stuff before the bad guys do. You don't have to hire the expensive pen testers to find some of the basics. We got a gentleman here in the front row with a Bloodhound shirt. Phenomenal tool. As a defender, run this on your network. All the time we see incorrect permissions on things. Clean it up before the pen testers show up, or more importantly, the real bad guys show up. You can use these tools yourself as the defender, clean it up before the real bad guys get in, right? It wouldn't be one of my presentations without mentioning Kerberoasting, my baby here. I released this talk, we're coming up just over 9 years, and I'm like, God, this will be cool. This will work for like a year or two. Still bloody works. It's fundamentally a service account with a terrible password that we can offline crack. Happy to talk to you about it for hours if you're interested in, but simple things like this, right? A lot of this comes down to defending what you have, but I can't defend if I don't freaking know what I've got. Now, it's dead simple to say have an asset inventory. Realistically, way more complex, right? But we've got to understand, what do we have out there? Is it getting updated? Is it being monitored, right? Both from a hardware perspective, the software side of things. Of course, we've got training, talk to our end users, talk to the admins, how to securely set up these systems, developers, how to securely develop code, protect secrets related to that, and of course, testing related to that. All right, with that, thank you all so much for coming out. My voice survived. I'm so happy. Thank you to the folks, the Black Hills folks running the event, all the great sponsors, and we'll see you around.